My husband abandons me while I'm fighting cancer, leaving only a note. But 4 years later, I invite him home to see who I live with when he tries to win me back. 5 years ago, I married my ex-husband, Jerry. A year later, he left me during one of the worst phases of my life. Back then, we were both 25. We had dated for 3 years after college and then married because it seemed like the next logical step, as we were happy together. We had been married for roughly 4 months when I was suddenly diagnosed with stage 2 cervical cancer. I'd had some symptoms for a couple of months, but we attributed them to stress and minor illnesses. When things worsened, we had to take my condition seriously, and that's when I received the diagnosis. After that, I was in the hospital constantly. During the first few months, Jerry was extremely helpful. He took care of me, managed medical reports, and stayed in touch with doctors. I felt I didn't have to worry about anything, and when I started chemotherapy and began losing my hair, he shaved his head in solidarity. In short, he was literally perfect. But then he began losing faith. After nearly 6 months of treatment, I showed no signs of improvement. Gradually, I worsened. Jerry started distancing himself, and when I tried to talk to him, he shut down. I was already going through so much, and his behavior made me feel rejected. I couldn't bear it, so I started confronting him just to get his attention. It worked, for a while, but then he pulled away even more emotionally. Finally, about 2 weeks before our first wedding anniversary, I woke up one day, and he was gone. All he left was a note on our nightstand telling me not to look for him because he didn't want to be found. I thought it was a joke, so I tried calling and messaging him repeatedly but got no response. After a few minutes, I realized he'd blocked me, not just my phone number, but also on social media. I panicked and called my in-laws. They said they didn't know anything and would contact me as soon as they learned something, but they never did. I informed my parents and they moved in to care for me in his absence, assuming he'd return in a few days. Unfortunately, he never came back. After he disappeared, I did everything to find him, but he was gone for good. It took me a long time to recover emotionally, and I was deeply depressed for quite a while. I tried reaching out to my in-laws multiple times, but after that first call, they didn't respond until a month later. They visited, but their attitude was cold and strange. Then they informed me they were only there to deliver divorce papers. It shattered me. I realized they'd been in contact with Jerry but refused to give me details. They said he wanted nothing to do with me and apologized, explaining it had to end this way because he couldn't waste his life on me. It hurt deeply, because I could. See, the only reason he left was my cancer and his refusal to keep caring for me. It's not that I didn't understand what he was going through, it must have been hard for him, but the least he could have done was talk to me. After 3 years together and a year of marriage, we owed each other an honest, transparent conversation about our feelings. But he didn't think he owed me even that, so he left without a word. It took time to process emotionally. After his parents gave me the divorce papers, I signed them without drama. It was clear there was nothing left to fight for, so it was better to let go with dignity. I hired a lawyer, but honestly, his terms were fair. Plus, after just a year of marriage, we had no shared assets, and neither of us wanted to drag it out. Once the waiting period passed, we finalized the divorce without meeting face-to-face. Everything I needed to communicate went through my lawyer, who contacted his parents and legal team. After that, I never heard from my in-laws again. Though completely shattered, I knew I had to move forward somehow. My condition had worsened due to depression, and though my parents tried to stay strong for me, I saw how hard it was for them to watch me like that. For their sake, I knew I couldn't just give up, even though it would have been easier. I decided to fight for my life. I don't know if it was a mental shift or the treatment finally working, but somehow I pulled through. Now I'm well, and 3 months cancer-free. It hasn't been easy, but over the past 4 years, I've worked hard to be grateful for life. Part of that gratitude meant giving myself a second chance at love, which is why I let my ex-boyfriend move in with me 6 months ago. Here's some context about him and me. We met in college and dated for 2 years but broke up after graduation because we wanted different things. My ex, let's call him Andy, and I were part of a larger friend group that included Jerry. After graduation, Andy and I lost touch. But a few months after our breakup, Jerry approached me. We started talking, became friends, and within months, he confessed he'd always had feelings for me, even in college. He said he hadn't acted sooner because I was with Andy, but now that we'd split, he wanted to ask me out. After a couple of months, I agreed, and that's how we ended up together. Even as our relationship grew serious, Jerry always seemed insecure about Andy. Though I'd stayed friends with Andy after our breakup, I eventually cut him out completely because Jerry wasn't comfortable with him. Mutual friends told me Andy was deeply hurt that I ignored and blocked him after dating Jerry, but at the time, Jerry mattered more to me than anyone else. I was fully committed. Eventually, I married Jerry and forgot about Andy entirely. When Jerry and I divorced, I never posted about it online but told some friends. I assume that's how Andy learned about the divorce and my diagnosis. 5 months after the divorce was finalized, Andy emailed me. He expressed sadness over everything I was going through, the divorce and cancer. He said he'd really like to be friends again but would understand if I wasn't comfortable. He ended the email saying he'd always be there if I needed someone to talk to. His message was so sweet and thoughtful, but I was still reeling from Jerry's abandonment, so I didn't reply. I thought about Andy's email occasionally and considered responding, but not until 10 months later, when I finally accepted Jerry was gone for good. Friends encouraged me to reach out, even just as friends. So I did. I had no intention of rekindling things. I just wanted closure, as he'd made an effort too. I replied in a purely friendly way, and that's how we started talking again. Eventually, we became good friends, and it was nice having someone to talk to regularly, especially since Andy understood me better than anyone. I had other friends, but there was always something special with him. Talking to him made me happy. My parents noticed and encouraged me to keep talking to him, even if just as friends. For months, we only spoke online, but then he started visiting me at home. Gradually, we grew closer, and though I wasn't ready to be with him again, he didn't give up. Last year, Andy finally admitted he'd never stopped loving me. Learning I'd started dating Jerry had devastated him, but he'd stepped back to let me be happy. Now that Jerry was out of my life and we'd reconnected as friends, he felt it was time to be honest about his feelings. He expected nothing in return but wanted to be upfront. I appreciated his honesty, but was confused. 3 years had passed since my divorce, yet I still felt uneasy thinking about Jerry and our past because we'd never had closure. I was torn about moving forward, even though I genuinely liked Andy. And honestly, I was sure I loved him more now. My parents and friends reminded me that 3 years had passed, and if Jerry hadn't returned by now, it meant he never cared and never would. They convinced me to stop living in the past and give Andy a chance. So, a couple of weeks after his confession, I decided to get back together with him. After a few months of dating, he told me he wanted to be the person who took care of me. He said he wanted to move in, and after thinking it through, my parents and I agreed that since he was already spending most of his time at my house, it would make sense for him to just move in. So I let him. Since then, we've been living together. It's been great. I love having him close. A couple of weeks after he moved in, once he got familiar with my routine, my parents moved back to their own home. They still visit regularly, of course, but they finally have time for themselves, and I think they really appreciate that. I'm not ready for a second marriage yet, but Andy and I have talked about the idea, and maybe someday we'll consider it. Still, these past few months I've been truly happy, cancer-free and living with Andy, who genuinely loves me and whom I love back. Everything was perfect until earlier this week, when Jerry contacted me. He'd finally unblocked me everywhere, and sent me a Facebook message, saying he'd realized he'd treated me terribly and that I didn't deserve that. Of course, it hadn't been my fault that I was diagnosed with cancer or that I wasn't responding well to treatment, but he'd gotten frustrated and made the cowardly decision to vanish without even talking to me about it. He said he owed me closure and honesty more than anything, and that he wanted to get back together because, over the past 4 years, all he'd done was miss me terribly. He claimed he was ready to give our marriage a second chance and make things work again, even if it meant caring for me for the rest of his life. He said he was willing to do whatever it took. I decided to ask him to visit, but not for the reasons he thought. This is where I might have acted poorly because my intentions were obvious. I wanted to hurt him. I hadn't posted anything about my diagnosis or recovery online. Only my family and close friends knew I was now healthy. So naturally, he still assumed I was battling cancer, and after 4 years of absence, he'd finally decided to return. It was infuriating that he believed I'd take him back after how he'd treated me, pretending I hadn't even existed in his life for 4 years. I was furious reading that message because he clearly thought I'd accept him back without question. He didn't even bother explaining what he'd been doing all that time. That's how confident he was. I was so upset that I decided to teach him a lesson. I invited him over just so he could see my new life. He had no idea I lived with Andy because I've never been one to publicize my relationships. I only posted about Jerry online when we married, so now, very few people know about Andy and me, and none of them are in contact with Jerry. So, a couple of days ago, when Jerry showed up at my door with flowers and chocolates, the first thing I did after opening it was call Andy to come to the door and tell Jerry that, while I appreciated his apology, flowers, and chocolates, I'd already moved on and didn't want him back. Immediately, he started losing it, because of course Andy was the one person who'd always made him insecure. He began yelling, accusing me of betraying him and even cheating. I don't see how he considers that cheating, since I wasn't even with him when I started dating Andy again. Maybe Jerry's forgotten, but I was alone because he divorced me. Anyway, I didn't care about his reaction. I just wanted to shock him, and I succeeded. So, while he had an emotional meltdown on my porch, I closed the door, and Andy and I went back to watching TV. For the record, I hadn't told Andy about this beforehand, but he didn't mind what I did. However, my parents and friends think there was no reason for me to do this. They said I could have let it go because I was inviting toxicity back into my life, and honestly, they might be right. After he left that day, my in-laws haven't stopped trying to contact me, claiming I've been heartless. They say if I'd already moved on, I shouldn't have invited their son over and given him false hope. They insist he was genuinely remorseful and wanted to fix things with me, which is why he reached out and visited. They accuse me of intentionally sabotaging his mental health and even have the nerve to suspect I've been having an affair with Andy all along, even though they know perfectly well that for the past 4 years, I've focused solely on recovery. And before marrying Jerry, I cut Andy out of my life completely for Jerry's sake. So I don't get how they dare accuse me of cheating. In short, they're trying to paint me as the villain, acting like their son is completely innocent in all this. As I mentioned, my parents and friends already disapprove. They've told me what I did was unnecessary. They understand I felt the need for revenge, but at the end of the day, it was still petty. They're not making a huge deal of it, but they've voiced their thoughts, and I do feel a little guilty. I could have avoided all the drama by just ignoring him. And yes, I was spiteful, but now I feel bad. Still, I don't think I owe him an apology or anything because I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's definitely not as severe as his parents are making it out to be, especially considering he literally abandoned me while I was fighting for my life and ghosted me for 4 years. He didn't even show up for our divorce. His parents never apologized either, so I don't get why I'm expected to be forgiving and just let the past go, especially when they know how their son treated me. So, am I the jerk for inviting my ex-husband over just to show him my new life? Update 1. Thank you all for the comments on my post. They've been helpful. First, I talked to my parents and friends about why I did what I did. I don't deny it was petty and unnecessary. I could have avoided the drama by not replying, but I felt I needed closure. I didn't think through the consequences. It was a heat-of-the-moment decision. So it probably wasn't the best way to handle it, but I don't regret it. They didn't say much, and we agreed to drop the topic because it wasn't worth dwelling on. It wasn't as bad as some of you might think. Maybe I didn't explain it well originally, but to clarify, my parents and friends weren't pushing me to apologize to my ex. They just said they didn't fully agree with my choice, then let it go. They didn't guilt-trip me like my in-laws are doing. After discussing it, we've agreed to disagree. It's not a big deal for them, and nothing's changed in our relationships. We're fine. The only issue now is my in-laws, who are furious. They believe I emotionally tortured their son by inviting him over and think I owe him a massive apology. Seriously. They've emailed me multiple times demanding I apologize in person and clarify that I had nothing to do with Andy while I was with Jerry, because apparently Jerry is devastated. I don't get why they expect so much from Me, especially since we've had no relationship since the divorce. They knew what their son did to me was horribly wrong, yet they supported him and helped him hide during the divorce process. I don't fully blame them, but they're a big reason I never got closure from Jerry during the split. So how was it okay for them back then? But now that Jerry's mental health is at risk, suddenly I have to explain myself. He didn't think I deserved that back then, and neither did they. So now I'm just playing by their rules. Update 2-3 days have passed since my last update, and I hadn't heard anything. Though, of course, that probably didn't sit well with Jerry and his parents. Andy and I work from home, but I guess they didn't know that. They likely assumed Andy wouldn't be home if they showed up in the morning. This morning, Jerry and his parents came to visit me. When I opened the door, they immediately began demanding that I talk to Jerry and explain everything that was happening because he was so confused, and they couldn't let their son go through this. I literally rolled my eyes and told them I wasn't going to entertain any of this nonsense. I owed them nothing, since Jerry hadn't even bothered to give me an explanation when he left. Now he could think whatever he wanted. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of an explanation or a reaction. The only reason I even opened the door was to say this to their faces. Then I told them if they didn't leave, I'd call the police. That's when Jerry started yelling at me, calling me a horrible person for what I'd done, saying I was petty and selfish, and then he began hurling insults. When he started shouting, Andy heard and came to my side. He looked furious, and I could tell he was struggling to hold himself back from confronting Jerry, which I really didn't want him to do. So I took out my phone and told Jerry and his parents they had to leave or I'd actually call the police. After arguing with me for a few more seconds, they finally left because I'd already started dialing, though they didn't miss the chance to throw a few more insults my way. It didn't faze me, but it really angered Andy, who shot back with insults of his own before they left. Thankfully, Andy had started recording everything on his phone. There's barely any video, but he has a full audio recording of Jerry yelling at me, and he kept recording until they were gone. Now that we have this evidence, we know that if they show up again, we'll not only press charges but also contact our lawyers to file a restraining order against Jerry and his family. I truly hope it doesn't come to that and that they leave me alone after this, because I think I've said everything I needed to say. Update 3A: couple of days have passed since Jerry and his parents showed up at my house. After that, they stopped trying to contact me, and I felt a huge relief. I talked to some friends about what happened, and they said that while what I did was a bit petty and unnecessary, Jerry and his parents' reaction was way over the top. They thought I should consult a lawyer just in case, but I don't think I'll need to. Last night, I received an email from Jerry. He told me he's moving to Europe with his parents and will never bother me again. Apparently, after leaving me, he moved to California for a new job. He'd applied for that position while we were still together but didn't dare discuss it with me because he knew it'd be impossible for me to move at the time. He also didn't want me to feel like I owed him anything. He admitted feeling like a terrible person for abandoning me while I was fighting for my life, confessing he was a coward who ran away to avoid any confrontation. He explained that while he'd had a few casual relationships over the past 4 years, he could never commit seriously to anyone because he always regretted how things ended between us. Recently, he applied for a position in Europe and had been back in town for a few months to convince his parents to move with him and start fresh. That's why he reached out. He wanted to at least apologize and see if we could give things another shot. But after seeing me with Andy the other day, he realized he had no right to intrude on my life, especially after everything he'd put me through. He also acknowledged that neither he nor his parents had any right to question me. So now, he says he's doing the right thing by leaving me alone. He added that he doesn't expect forgiveness because his apology is too late and insufficient, but he wanted to apologize for everything he'd done. He admitted he'd been a coward and didn't even have the right to throw tantrums and send his parents after me like he did. Jerry said he could see that Andy loves me and that I'm happy, so he'll stay out of my life. I have to say I'm glad he reached this conclusion. I didn't reply to his email, but I showed it to Andy and shared it with my friends and parents. Everyone agrees this is a good way to close this chapter, and I think so too. Now we can all finally move on. This comes at a good time because in the coming months, I think I'd like to marry Andy and start a new chapter of my life with him. I guess I finally got the closure I needed, and I'm ready to marry again, start a family, and live my life to the fullest once more. Update 4 month ago, after everything that had happened, I thought we'd finally reached the closure we both needed, and that it was all behind us. Jerry and his parents never showed up again, and the silence seemed like the closure I'd hoped for. However, recently I received an email from him. Jerry said he'd been waiting for a response from me, that he'd already apologized, and he didn't understand why I hadn't replied. He claimed he was making an effort to fix things and that I couldn't spare a few seconds to respond. His message shifted from a supposed apology to telling me that if I'd ever truly loved him, I should have at least had the decency to consider his message. Then came a hurtful and absurd accusation. He said I'd replaced him with Andy too, quickly, and if I couldn't even give him a chance, then I'd clearly never loved him. He added that I'd always loved Andy more, and that's why, according to him, I jumped at the first chance to get back with him. The email was rambling and disjointed, but that was the gist. The premise seemed to be that while he left my life, for 4 years I should have waited patiently for him, and that I owed him gratitude for it. It felt absurd, as if I should have sat idle with my life on pause waiting for him. So I did what I felt I had to. I sent his message straight to the spam folder. I wanted to forget him and move on without wasting another minute. However, yesterday Jerry showed up at my house. I had no idea he was still in town since, as far as I knew, he'd moved to Europe. Everything felt off, and when I saw him at the door, I knew something was wrong. That's when, during a tense argument with Andy, Jerry confessed he'd never actually moved. That supposed final departure was just a tactic, an attempt to test whether I still loved him and would fight to keep him from leaving. He told me, shamelessly, that he'd lied about relocating, that his apology and attempt to reconnect hadn't been sincere. Jerry admitted he'd tried to manipulate me into seeing him as a remorseful good person who deserved a second chance. He wanted me to find something redeeming in him and ultimately leave Andy to return to him. And if I didn't, then, in his words, that would confirm I'd never truly loved him. As he spewed these manipulative, delusional confessions, Andy tried to calm him down and ask him to leave. The situation escalated quickly. Seeing Jerry wasn't willing to listen to reason, I decided to call the police. While I made the call, Jerry grew even angrier. Hearing that I was contacting the police seemed to trigger more aggression. He screamed at me to tell the cops nothing was happening, or I'd regret it if I went through with the call. Andy retorted that if he kept talking like that, he'd be the one with regrets. Jerry ignored the warning and tried to punch Andy. At that moment, everything spiraled out of control. Andy reacted instantly. Without hesitation, he punched back, leaving Jerry visibly shaken. Just then, several neighbors who were out jogging intervened to separate them. The neighbors stayed until the police arrived and took control. Meanwhile, I showed them the video I'd recorded of the entire altercation. With that evidence, the police decided to take Jerry into custody. Andy also went to the station in his own car, ready to file a formal complaint against Jerry. My next step will be to request a restraining order not just against Jerry, but against anyone who tries to come to my house on his behalf, whether his parents or others. I want no more threats, manipulation, or drama in my life, especially not in my own home. This experience has been a real eye-opener. In a way, it gives me peace knowing I made the right choice by cutting ties with someone as manipulative and toxic as Jerry. Edit. Since there's not much left to share, I'll just add this final note. I now have a restraining order, and over 2 months have passed. Thankfully, Jerry hasn't reappeared or tried to contact me. I don't know what's happened to him, but as long as he stays away, that's best for everyone. As for the assault charge Andy filed, Jerry only had to pay a small fine.